All right, so you've seen this happen, right? A company is absolutely crushing it in its home country, a total powerhouse. But then they try to go global, expand into a new emerging market, and they just fall flat. Why? Well, the answer is super fascinating, and it's all about learning to see what isn't there. We're going to get right into it. I mean, really, why is it so hard? You've got this company, right? They have a product people love, a business model that's a proven winner. They step into a new country, a place just brimming with potential, and nothing. They just stall out. It happens over and over. But what is going on here? Okay, let's look at a perfect example, Vizio. In the US, these guys were geniuses. They became the #1 flat panel TV brand, and they did it with this incredibly lean, smart business model. No need for massive ad spends or their own fancy stores. Nah, they just expertly piggybacked on partners like Costco, for that instant credibility and distribution, and they used this super sophisticated logistics network to keep their costs way down. Brilliant, right? But here's the thing. If Vizio tried to just copy and paste that exact same playbook into a market like Brazil, it would almost certainly bomb. Why? Because all that stuff they rely on, the super efficient logistics, the big national retail chains, the easy consumer financing, that whole invisible support system just doesn't exist in the same way. And look, Vizio's problem, it's not some one-off thing. This is the central puzzle of expanding into emerging markets. And the key to solving it is to start seeing this invisible infrastructure. It's like uncovering the hidden rules of the game that, honestly, most of us just take for granted. Okay, stick with me on this game analogy. What if you were trying to play a game, but the rulebook was only half written, and some of the referees just didn't show up? And to top it all off, the scoreboard is totally unreliable. You wouldn't know what's going on. Well, that is exactly what doing business in a lot of these markets can feel like. And all this missing stuff, it actually has a name. They're called institutional voids. And this right here, this is the core concept for everything we're talking about today. An institutional void is basically the absence of all those reliable building blocks that just make a market work. Things we never even think about, like credit agencies, specialized shipping companies, courts that you can actually trust, clear and simple regulations. When those pieces are missing or they just plain don't work right, that gap, that's an institutional void. So this idea of institutional voids, it really is the key. It unlocks the whole puzzle. It explains exactly why Vizio's model can't just be dropped into a new country, and, more importantly, it gives us a roadmap for figuring out what the heck to do about it.
All right, so if you're a company and you're staring at this broken game, what are your choices? Do you just pack up and go home, avoid the market entirely? Or do you figure out a way to play anyway? Well, the smartest companies, they choose to play. They just play a very, very different game.
So how do they pull it off? Well, researchers have actually pinpointed 4 really brilliant strategies that the most successful companies use to navigate these voids. Think of this as your toolkit, your playbook for turning what looks like a huge problem into a serious competitive advantage. And here they are: internalize, substitute, borrow, and signal. Each one is a totally different approach to solving a piece of this puzzle. Let's dive into how they actually work. Okay, first up, internalization. The logic on this one is super straightforward. If the market doesn't have something you desperately need, well, you just build it yourself. This is exactly what massive conglomerates like the Tata Group in India did. Back when India's capital markets weren't very developed, what did Tata do? They just created their own internal bank. Couldn't find reliable suppliers? Fine, they built their own. They literally built an entire ecosystem inside their own company to make up for all the gaps and voids on the outside. All right, our second strategy is substitution. This one's all about using the special knowledge that only you have to fill in the blanks that the market leaves open. And this is where a void can actually turn into a huge advantage. So, picture this. You've got an information void. The government doesn't provide reliable data, so nobody really knows what's going on. But if your company has been on the ground there for years, you can substitute your own deep, private knowledge for that missing public info. And suddenly, you can make way smarter decisions than any of your competitors who are basically just guessing. Okay, third on our list is borrowing. Now, this is a really clever one. It's where you basically look outside the local market to find the stability and predictability that you're just not getting at home. A perfect classic example is the legal system. Let's say you're doing a deal in a country where the courts are, well, let's just say they're not very reliable. That's a massive risk. So, what do? You borrow a better legal system.
Right there in the contract, you write a clause that says any disputes have to be settled under, say, UK or US law. Boom. You've just imported stability and de-risked the whole deal.
And that brings us to our fourth and final strategy, signaling. This one is all about one thing, building trust, especially in places where trust is a really scarce commodity. So think about it. If you're in a market where corruption is high and nobody trusts anybody, how do you prove you're one of the good guys? You have to signal it loud and clear. And this is where something like corporate social responsibility, CSR, becomes so much more than just a nice thing to do. It's a powerful business move. It signals to potential partners, customers, and the government that you're credible, you're reliable, and you're in it for the long haul. Okay, so let's do a quick recap of our toolkit. If your partners are unreliable, you internalize. If there's no good information, you substitute. If the local laws are shaky, you borrow. And if there's no trust, you signal. 4 big problems, 4 really smart solutions. But okay, here's where the story takes a really exciting turn. What if these voids aren't just obstacles to get around? What if they're actually the engine for a whole new type of innovation? For a masterclass in turning voids into a weapon, we absolutely have to look at the Chinese EV giant BYD. I mean, just look at this trajectory. It's absolutely wild. They started out as a battery company. Then they got into cars by, let's be honest, by copying other companies' models. But fast forward to the end of 2023, and they actually surpassed Tesla in quarterly global sales of pure electric vehicles. How on earth did that happen? Well, they didn't just deal with institutional voids, they weaponized them. First off, they harnessed something called China speed. And this was only possible because of what's known as a cognitive void, which is just a fancy way of saying there wasn't a lot of shared public knowledge about what customers wanted. BYD used its incredible private access to local data to fill that void, and this let them design, build, and launch new cars at a speed that just left their global rivals in the dust. And second, they were forged in a normative void. That means the typical rules and norms around work culture were just different. This led to the creation of what's called Juan culture, a super intense, internally competitive environment, famous for the 996 work schedule. And that relentless, tireless culture, born out of that specific void, created a pace of innovation that is just incredibly difficult for anyone outside that system to match. So, what's the big takeaway here? What should you remember from all this? It's really about flipping your entire perspective. When you look at an emerging market, the most important thing isn't to see what's there. The real trick is to get very, very good at seeing what's missing. Because those gaps, those voids, they're not just problems. They're clues. They're giant flashing signposts pointing you directly to inefficiencies, to unmet customer needs, to massive untapped potential. Voids show you exactly where a new business model is waiting to be built, where a new kind of company can thrive, and where the next global giants are going to come from. So the real question you should be asking isn't, how do I avoid these voids? The real question is, where is the next void that's hiding a billion-dollar opportunity?